Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me, man.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
So, for those that haven't met this gentleman before, his name's Chris Enns. He's the owner of From Rags to Reasonable, helping creatives and other money misfits build financial stability. Now, full disclaimer, not only does he have his own business as a financial planner, but he's also my brother-in-law. And so I'm a little bit biased when it comes to how much I appreciate Chris, not only as a human being, but as a professional. Chris and I actively work together. He's my finance coach. And at this point in the world, when so much has shifted and there's been somewhat of an imposition of financial stress on such a massive percentage of the population, it seemed all that much more relevant for us to have some kind of conversation around money, in particular for those that have variable incomes, because I know that's very much an area that you specialize in. So before we dive into the series of questions that I have here, I was hoping that you could just kind of introduce yourself and like, what's your story? Because you went from an opera singer to being a financial planner.
Is that not a normal career trajectory? Are you saying that it's not what everybody does?
I think it's normal for you.
Interesting. Interesting, you say.
So yeah. So if you could just kind of share a little bit of your story there, that'd be great.
Yeah, totally. I think that the most important thing I always find to start with telling people whenever we're about to have a conversation about money, I feel it's important for for people to know that I did not grow up being great with my money. This is not I'm not one of these people that I don't think in spreadsheets. Math wasn't always my favorite. I lived most of my first decades just ignoring the topic as much as possible. So I was the person, if it came up at a party, would be like, and I'm going to the kitchen, and
Right.
I'm going to this room. It's I just did not want to talk about it. And the big thing for me was some of the beliefs behind that were this idea that everybody understood this money stuff and only I didn't. And so I didn't want to ask a question and seem stupid. And then as I started, because my training is in opera, and so as I was in university studying that, I got some built-in excuses. So it's artists aren't supposed to be good at their money. Oh, so I was okay, so I never have to look at this. Or I kind of assumed that I would figure out money when I started to make money, which didn't happen, by the way. But spoiler, really a lot of the lessons that I learned about money started from making a bunch of mistakes. Some of the highlights were tanking my credit while shopping at Moore's Clothing for Men. I was buying some sweet V-neck sweaters, as you do. And they were here, there's a store credit card. And I was great, you can get $50 off. All great. You know what? There's nothing actually terrible that happened so far. We're in the story, this is fine. But then I moved and I didn't pay it. And I forgot about it. And then it took 7 years to drop off my credit report.
I find it really funny that this Moore's story revolves around V-neck sweaters and not a fancy suit, which is so you.
Yeah, yes.
but I find that really funny.
Not at all. It was just a sweet V-neck sweater. It was actually 3 of them. I don't know why I remember the sweaters so clearly, but I couldn't remember the debt. Interesting. That probably says something about me. I also got into a bunch of trouble because I kept telling myself I couldn't afford to go to the dentist. Because there's a funny story about cavities. When you ignore them, they don't go away. There's a funny analogy about finances there. There's cavities become root canals, become infected root canals.
Right.
There's a whole thing there. But anyway, that became thousands of dollars of dental debt. And even this was not enough to make me face my finances. It wasn't actually until I left school and I started at the Canadian Opera Company, which is an opera company in Toronto. They have an apprenticeship program where you make a weekly salary. And for those that right out of school, but especially anybody who's in the arts is it was more money than I'd ever dealt with. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was more money.
It's consistent.
And funny, and it was consistent, which was huge.
Right.
But the funny thing is that I had always believed that I would start figuring this out when I started to make money. But actually I didn't. It's turns out that more money just amplified what I was doing before. My dinners got a bit more expensive, my sweaters got a bit more expensive. And at come tax time, I was filing my taxes and I made some mistakes, which is fine. you don't go to prison for making mistakes on your taxes. But when they sent me letters that got more and more brightly colored, I ignored those letters. And then they started to call me and I ignored the calls. And anyways, that's what became the thousands of dollars of tax debt that kind of made me go, wait, maybe I should look at this part of my life.
Right.
And that's the thing where things started to kind of switch a little bit, because when I started to look at my money and start to kind of face that part of my life, it just was different than I thought. It wasn't all about math and spreadsheets. It was still hard, but it was hard for different reasons. It was hard because it asked questions like, what do you want to do right now? Like, what are you trying to do? And then what are you doing right now? And how does that mesh? And it actually ended up being way more like things that I was already good at. And so kind of started to develop an area of strength. All that to say, this is a long rambling way to answer your question, but it became something that I just turned into it was more of a strength. And so as I was singing, I wanted to talk about that more in my community. We don't talk about money in any community. The arts may be especially bad, but it's bad everywhere. We don't have a financial conversation. And so I wanted to do that. So I started blogging and writing online about it a bit more. And then I didn't want to I wanted to give the best information possible. So I started taking courses, online courses, kind of backstage while I was singing in operas, and then ended up with a certification in financial planning and starting to work with people one-on-one and liking that work more and more. And really, especially this idea of this money misfit thing, which is getting to talk to people that don't feel like they're part of the financial conversation, that don't connect to the bullet points that we talk about money. Right. They just feel aside from that. And that's a lot of the creative community, but it's way bigger than that. I've worked with lots of people in the fitness industry, people that are self-employed in their own business.
Really? Yeah. I had no idea.
What?
Oh my gosh.
So it's been interesting to see how many people feel like they're not, they don't connect with money the way that the top 5 Google results connect with money. And then the challenge really becomes, how do we connect to it? How do we, because we all have to deal with it. So how do we connect to it when we don't think that way? When we don't think in spreadsheets and we aren't, math isn't an area of real confidence. And, we're not just all looking for hyper efficiency on our tax returns, or at least that doesn't excite us. Like, how do we get into that conversation?
Right.
And the thing I always say when we're looking at opera and financial planning, which seem like really different things, is where they overlap is trying to convince people that a thing they think is boring is actually really exciting. That's where they meet. That's the little overlap there.
You're good at that, actually. You're really good at that. You're incredibly good at like telling stories. And I know even just from our time together, when you would start talking about a concept, and a specific example is eluding me right now, but where you would talk about something and you'd be like, actually, it's exactly like in fitness, right? So like if you want to, I don't know, we'll use an example and I'm sure it applies, where you have a beginner who just doesn't have the skill set in the gym. Like they are just, when it comes to their motor function, they're just not very skilled. You're not going to give them an advanced movement. It's just not logical, right? And it doesn't reflect their current abilities. And so you need to micro progress them, and I'm sure we could make that kind of example fit within financial planning for sure.
It's a huge one. And it's also worth kind of mentioning is that when you are a beginner, from a teaching perspective, you've seen it. So you have to recognize it in yourself when you're like, okay, what I want is to do this really, seemingly advanced. I want to do this kind of investing. That's what I'm pumped about.
Right.
But you can't get there right away. You don't become a master right away. And you can't skip the process. You can want to skip the process. You can get super frustrated about wanting to skip the process. But you still have to go through that same kind of strengthening. The fundamentals are the fundamentals, no matter where you're focused. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that I feel like is so connected with this idea of finance and fitness.
Yeah. And even just, and when you were talking, I was getting really excited. I don't know if you could see, not just within finance and fitness, but within so many different facets of life. So, as you know, I'm doing some mentorship now, and so some of my clients are fitness professionals that are in the process of getting used to using an online platform to market.
Huge.
And I'm saying they, because this comes up a lot, where they're like, but I want to be a pro. I want to be at a point where making a piece of content doesn't take me 8 hours. I want to get to a point where I can just rapid fire it off. And the analogy that I would use with them is like, let's compare this to, let's say, some kind of career, like being, I don't know, an astrophysicist or something. And let's say you're in elementary school and this career path is brought to your attention. It's great to have this goal and this ambition that when you're older, you want to be an astrophysicist. But right now you're in like first grade or second or third. And so right now you learning how to add and subtract, although it's not where you want to be, you learning how to add and subtract is exactly where you need to be.
Yeah.
And having this expectation that you should be anywhere other than where you are now creates nothing other than suffering. And suffering, all that does, at least in part, is it robs you of your ability to be effective in the moment. And so if we can like accept where we are and kind of like relinquish the judgment of where we think we should be, we actually become that much more effective at making moves right now in like our current situation. And I found that, to kind of draw a parallel with the work that you and I have done, it's like, okay, I feel like a total idiot with my money right now. I feel like a total idiot. I don't know where to start. And actually, like, I know you know this, but for those that don't know, my sister, when I left my job with Good Life, was like, hey, you need to be good at your money. So I'm going to like essentially sponsor you and pay for some time for you to work with my fiance or boyfriend at the time, right? You guys weren't married at that time, but she was like, Chris is really good with this shit. So like, you should work with him. And I had no idea. And it had Mimi being my sister, had she not been like, you should do this, kind of acknowledging that I suck with money a little bit, I wouldn't have started to develop the skill set, because I identified at that time as being, I'm just someone who's bad at this.
Yeah.
Like people that are good with money, oh, that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't even entertaining the idea at that time of trying to develop the skill set. Like it seemed so lofty and removed from what I thought I could do and who I thought I was at that time. So I'm kind of curious, and and I know I can speak to my experience, but like for yourself, for people that feel really, for people for whom money is super daunting.
Yep.
And they're like, what the heck do I do? They feel lost, confused, overwhelmed. I know this is probably, an it depends answer, but where would you start with some of those people?
It's always an it depends, but in a beautiful way, because I think that there's a lot of parallels between fitness here too, because you can ask the same question, and there's from what you said before, and I just want to like circle back because I think it connects really well, is that how much in fitness do you find yourself working with people's limiting beliefs? I can't do that. I've never done that. My body doesn't do that. I'm not able to run a mile, do a pull-up. Although, some people's bodies can't do pull-ups. That's actually a logistic fact. So that's not a limiting belief.
That's cool. We'll save that debate for another time. I feel like you might lose that argument, but that's okay.
But this idea of limiting beliefs is a big thing. And I actually start a lot of the time when I do workshops with that kind of slide, because beliefs are so powerful. And some of mine, as I was sharing before, is this idea of like, everybody else understands this. I'm the only person who doesn't. Right. I'm just bad with my money. If that's the thing that controls what you think is possible and isn't, you're never going to look for solutions. And I don't say that in a way that it's, because the thing around beliefs is that they're both really powerful and they're hard to change. They're really hard to change. They don't just change because some guy like me comes from the outside and says, that's a limiting belief. But starting to identify them in your life. I really believe that beliefs thrive in the shadows. They thrive when they're kind of like in the dark of the back of your brain and they're driving the train, but they're not, you don't consciously see them. And so one way to start, especially for people that kind of connect this idea of limiting beliefs or found that they've never even been able to start by just noticing those things when they pop up. So if your brain popped when, you just heard, I'm bad at money, I could never be good at this, just write it down sometime. And I really like this idea of writing it down, because when you physically manifest some of these things, you can see it a bit more clearly. And the thing that I love as far as a next step with beliefs is identify and then introduce reasonable doubt. So introduce this idea of, why could this not be true? Not this is a lie, because the thing about beliefs is that they're usually part true, which is what makes them really powerful. It's like, if you feel bad at your money and you've never engaged in that, like you said, the beginner mentality, the truth is you're probably kind of bad at it right now. The thing is, if you're identifying completely as this is how it always will be, you can't, there's no sense in getting a step one, because you're not able to absorb the fact that it's possible. And so opening up a possibility, so identifying and saying it's impossible to budget with a variable income, or whatever your words for that. Lots of people believe that. My income goes up and down, so I can't possibly have any kind of plan. Okay, so write that down. Then look at who in your life or who in your circle has a similar income and seems to be making a plan. Reasonable doubt. So this idea of, okay, it's not impossible. I don't know how, but I have to admit to myself that it's not impossible. And starting to kind of just put that out there in front of you. For those of you that feel like you can't even start, that might be a good place to start. For those of you that are like, okay, no, I get that I can do something, I just don't know what to do. A place to start for that is starting to be curious about your finances. And I think that a lot of us enter an area that we'd like to see differences in with full guns blazing change. And I feel like there must be similarities in finance here too, or in fitness as well.
Totally.
Where it's like, what you need to do is you need to get to know your body. You need to listen to your body. You need to do some stuff and be like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Or, oh, that's actually stronger than I thought. Or when I do that, this happens. And not in as little as possible in a judgment frame of mind. Not in I just spent a ton of money on this, I'm a terrible person. But when you're just looking at it, what I really like is kind of putting the mantra into your head of every time you spend, leave that place and say, I just spent $22 on lunch. That's interesting. Right. Not terrible. Not I'm just a terrible person for doing it. It's just a thing. Just start to get to know, be curious about this aspect of your life. I think that's already a way to start reframing how you're approaching it. Change happens down the road. It starts with awareness.
Yeah. So the two things that came up for me on that. One, have you read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear?
No, but I think we've talked about it.
Okay. Yeah, possibly. I'm a huge fan of that book.
Yeah.
And that book, the value of that book is created, I think it's within like chapter 2 or 4. There's a section of that book where it talks about identity. And I haven't read many texts that I find are that accurate and succinct with concepts about identity and behavior and habits. And one of the things that he talks about, there's this little quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but he says that every action you take is a vote for the person you wish to become. And I really like that. And so every action you take is a vote for the person you wish to become. So if you want to be disciplined with your money, acknowledging that by taking different actions, you start to reinforce the identity that you are someone who values money. And so it's interesting, within the self-help industry, there's this tendency where it tends to be from the inside out, where it's like, I need to change myself and my outer world will change. And that is true for sure, that's a part of it. But like you mentioned, identity is something that's really, really, really challenging to shift. And it can be quite painful for people in my experience. And so then there's an element of this where it's like, well, if you just start to change your habits, it will start to influence your identity and how you see yourself. And the last thing that you mentioned was awareness. And I think that was the first thing that we talked about, you and I, which was, you're like, okay, great. We had like a kind of a conversation outlining things and outlining the path. And you're like, cool, just log your money for, I think it was a month or something like that. And so I logged my stuff, and then you created this beautiful spreadsheet that showed like, this is the reality of how you're spending your money. Did you know, kind of a thing, you know? And it was just no judgment. It's just that like I think I was spending like, I don't know how many thousands of dollars a month on food, you know, and I was like, holy smokes. I had no idea. I knew I ate a lot, but I had no idea that I was actually spending that much on that. And yeah, that awareness thing was huge. And then that, I think, from what I remember, led into conversations about values, which was something that, and I was talking to Alexa about this a few days ago, and we were talking about it a little bit before the call. And it's this idea of what is your money for?
Yeah.
And that moment when we started talking about this, that was the moment when you really started to reframe how I viewed money management. I used to view it as being very anxiety ridden, and you humanized it. You neutralized a lot of the anxiety and the emotions that I felt revolving around it. When we started to delve into some of the questions of like, what is your money for, and what are your values, and how does money actually support that? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that's very intertwined with your philosophy as to what you do.
Totally. I'm a firm believer that like money is a nothing. Money is a nothing thing. And I think that for many of us that don't connect to money for money's sake. So there's nothing wrong with being like, I'm great. It's so exciting for me to just watch the numbers kind of go up. And I love the idea of exponential growth and all this kind of spreadsheet, more conventional finance stuff. A lot of people connect to it in that way. And that's great. For lots of us that don't connect to it, we need to find a different way in. And so you just said this idea of like every action is a vote for who you want to be. So the hard question at the core of your finances is, what are you voting? Like, what are you voting for? What are you trying to be? And that's a question that's really, really difficult, but it's the right question. And so much of any kind of work is finding the right questions that you come back to over and over and over again. Because I think that in money, we so often gravity well into somebody else's idea of success. So we just kind of like get pulled over into this person's idea. And I need to own a house by X. I need to have this much in the bank by X. And I need to be like, whatever those metrics are. Without any thought, we adopt them. There is no problem with any metrics. I don't have judgment value statements about any of those things. But I want people to choose them on purpose. I want people to say, instead of, I want to buy a house by 30, I want people to say, home is a really important value for me. This is what I want to be building. And I want you to start building it wherever you are right now. I want you to find money, not just for your down payment, but in a way that you can create home in your parents' basement, or you with your roommate, or with, however that is. I want you to start finding ways to reflect your money in what's important to you, because most of us don't care about the boring technique. This has got to be true in fitness as well. Like there's so much annoying, finicky stuff. That's not the thing. That's the thing you do to get to the thing. And yet that's what we obsess about. I don't want any of you guys to become spreadsheet nerds or to love like spending time on your bank account. If that happens, great. But that's not the point. The point is that you can frame that work in connection to something else. And so every time you're doing the annoying work of paying bills or going through things and doing cash flow or whatever it is, you can say, wait, why am I doing this? Right. I'm building this. I'm building this. I believe in generosity. I believe in community engagement. I want to change the world. I believe in impact. Whatever the words are, goals, values, anything, to have these things kind of listed for you so that you can reflect on them. They'll change. They have to change. But going through that process over and over is really important. And the one thing I'll add too, just in terms of not trying to give people a few practical things to think about as well.
Yeah.
The real reason to focus your money in this way and to kind of create a metric for success. So you're not just saying, when I have $100,000 in the bank, I'll be successful, because why? why is that? Like, what does that mean you can do? What does that unlock for you? Like, to really kind of focus on that is also this sense of that you're dealing with a finite resource. No matter if you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, or you're making 30K a year or 15K, it doesn't matter. It's finite. It's always going to be finite, and there's not going to be enough for everything you want to do. So by starting to practice the fundamental of not only answering the question of what is my money for, but answering the question of what is my money for right now, you can say, okay, the most important thing for me right now is building my business, which means that family might be number 3. That's a rough thing to write down on a piece of paper,
Yeah,
but
totally.
it's a way to acknowledge to yourself that, like, this is the truth right now. So it means when I'm deciding between 2 things, that's where I'm at. And it's often about kind of like recognizing a bit of a tension that's in you already.
Yes.
Everything can't be number 1. You can't put 100% of your time, energy, and money into 5 different things.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to do 5 different things in equal things, it will all go slower, which is fine, but it's something to accept. And so kind of going through this process of what do you want, what is your money for, can really help you just focus and plan out the way you use that resource.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many great points there. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes that I say a lot to my students is, you're shooting all over yourself, you know? And it's kind of a funny, shitting all over yourself, but like, you're shooting all over yourself, where it's like, we think that things should be a certain way. And once again, this comes back to the conversation we were having just right before we started recording, which was that, and I'll try to paraphrase here, but that so many people look externally for their solutions to their problems.
Of course.
Or not even solutions to their problems, but the solutions to their reality. And I think there's definitely an element of being inspired by other people and bringing in people, like, for instance, like the work that you and I do, or that you do with me, pardon me, like, you're far more skilled when it comes to finances than I am, at least for right now. And so, you being in my life to help me with the finance piece is crucial, because I'm very much a believer that ideas in equal ideas out. But if we look always or solely outside of us for our solutions, and that we don't necessarily trust our intuition and our wants and our needs and our values, that ends up becoming a source of a lot of strife, which is, I think, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, where it's like, I want to do this. Right now, business is a priority, and that has been one for me, for sure. Business is a priority for me. And therefore, if that's priority number 1, that means family can't be priority number 1. It means relationships can't be priority number 1. And the only reason why that would be a painful realization is because of the should. Is that we think that maybe it shouldn't be, or that because family isn't my top priority, that makes me a bad person. But it's like, no, like, if we just neutralize that and we get rid of the shoulds, and we just look at, like, what do you want and what is fulfilling for you, then all of a sudden, like, I find opening our eyes to the realities of, like, what are your values? Because I find how you spend your money or time or attention reflects your values, whether you've detected them or not. Like, I have one of my students who's in Texas, and I asked him in one of our first sessions, I was like, what are your values? He's like, I have no idea. And I was like, great. So let's do a time management exercise. I want to see how you spend your time.
Yeah. And
what we found was that, based off of how he was spending his time, adventure was his top priority, his top value, not business. And when he learned that, he was like, whoa, because I've been telling myself that business was my top value, yet clearly, based off of how I spend my time, adventure is my number 1. And I found that, like, it really gets rid of a lot of that internal friction once you can just open your eyes to just no bullshit, what's actually important for me.
And some of you might kind of be thinking, it's like, we've gone half an hour into a podcast, we haven't talked about money, or we haven't talked about numbers, and yet we've talked about money, right? And it's like, and I get this with clients sometimes too, because I love that. And there's so much awareness in trying to figure this out. But for me, this is one of the big missing pieces. It's not just about trying to make sure that you run a profit or any of these things. It's trying to make sure money matters to you and that you belong in the financial conversation of your own life. you know, that your opinion gets to matter and what you want gets to matter. And then once you've kind of built that, man, can you start comparing numbers in interesting ways? Because one of the things people throw in front of me all the time, they throw in front of me is their spending, or we look at their spending and they say, am I spending too much? I don't know, too much for what? Like sometimes they're out of balance, or they'll say I'm spending too much on groceries. I'm like, I don't know. I don't really care what you spend your money on. I want two things. I want it to be on purpose, and I want it to be in balance. So I do want it to be in balance with your income. And so there's a conversation there, but once you kind of start developing a success metric, you can put all of these conversations around like, oh, should I save or should I pay off debt? Let's go back with what are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? What serves that better? Okay. Should I be spending more on this or more on this? I don't know. Let's come back to this thing. It's worth spending more of your time here and then putting the numbers on top of it. You still have to do the numbers. I'm sorry, but you still do have to do that part. But coming back to this all the time so that you're not, remember that like in finances, we're not solving math problems. We're solving life problems. And so the less you can start to say, okay, I make $3,000 a month and I minus $1,800 and I have this. Sure, there's value in this. And if that's the way you understand things, great. But for those of us that don't, stop seeing the number as anything but a representation of part of your life. It's a summary of that thing. Even $500 of groceries. People can say, oh, I should be spending less. I'll spend $100 less. How? What does that mean? Because cutting that number in a real way means that you're changing something about how you're running your life from where you are. So what does that mean? Constantly looking at, I like the image of kind of flipping a number around, looking behind the number. What's behind it? What's the life thing that literally lives there? And for those of us, yet again, that aren't necessarily primarily friends with numbers, and a first step, this constantly kind of translates them into something that matters. And so that's where I encourage you. I know we're not talking about, you know, specific numbers and that kind of thing all the way, but we are. And this is the kind of work, because most of the time things feel hard because they are hard. It's not because you're missing a thing or because you're stupid or any of these things. It's because there's a life thing that's causing friction, or it's hard to shift behavior. It's hard to spend less on going out because you're part of a friend group that always goes out, and you're not saying no to another drink. You're saying no to spending time with people that you really care about. Totally different question and totally different work. So kind of bringing in the right kind of complexity is something I think about a lot in finance. And the right kind of complexity is what we've been talking about. What do you want? What are you trying to build? What are you trying to do? And how does that connect with how you use this resource? You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is the thing that I've loved the most about our time together, is that you've really, the reframes that you've offered me, and from the sounds of it, others, around money, has really, it's not, I don't know if humanizes is the right word, but it definitely, it makes you realize that it's not actually a big scary dragon anymore, and it's actually cute and cuddly, you know? And so it makes it so much less intimidating. And you know, when you were talking about like the other side of the number, I love quotes. I've got like a tab on my phone with just quotes that I love that are meaningful to me. And one of them is, regardless of how thin you slice it, there's always two sides. I love that. And it's like, that's true, like even molecularly, like if you, like the deeper, it doesn't matter how small you go, there's two sides to a thing. And so from a macro perspective, when it comes to a decision, I want to decrease my grocery spending by $100. Great. You're saying yes to decreasing it by $100, but what do you have to say no to? You need to say no to something that is proportionate to the thing that you say yes to. And that for me has, you know, and it ties in another one of my favorite quotes, which is by Mark Manson. And he says, pick your favorite flavor of shit sandwich.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's kind of funny, but it's like, open your eyes to the thing that might not be as tasteful. You know, it's like, you might want to save more money or make more money, but what are the things that are maybe less enjoyable that come with this decision? And And then that, like open your eyes to both sides of that coin really leads to us being able to make a very informed decision and a very intentional one. And like you were talking about earlier, where it was like, there isn't necessarily a right and wrong. Like we want things to balance out, but most importantly, I want you to be very intentional with how you do things. And I find that is just so incredibly refreshing. And this was one of the main reasons why I wanted to get you on here and for you to share some of your ideas, because and maybe the whole industry is in the process of shifting and that it just hadn't reached my ears prior to us working together. But I haven't met someone who works in finances that views it through your philosophical type of lens and who views it as being a reflection of values and money as being a thing that serves you. It's just so incredibly refreshing.
It definitely exists, but it's not the frontline conversation, right? I think that, money is talked about in one way. And this is as a background, as a storyteller and an artist and as an opera singer, one of the things that I'm really interested in is the idea that, like in opera and in lots of classical stories, we have like 6 stories that we've told over and over again. I can't remember exactly what the number is, but there's like the base stories is a very limited number. And we've spent hundreds and hundreds of years telling them over and over and over again. And I find that and I think that you've experienced the same thing in fitness. And the one thing that you love is just like, okay, how do we tell the story of fitness in another way? How can we tell the story of this and like look at this from a different angle and kind of, and I think that there's a lot of need for that because people learn in different ways. Mm-hmm. And the mantra that we hear over and over again is making a budget. We'll use the word that lots of people use, either I kind of go back and forth between one of like reclaim it and being like, I don't care what we call it. It's like, it's a word that people hate, but this idea of like, in order to budget means that I don't have enough. I need to spend less on everything and I need to have less of what I want is the sense that often comes with this and being like, this is another belief statement where you're like, it's not untrue, but it's a really unfortunate framing because for me, any kind of intentional plan, cash flow plan, budget, call it what you want, is about intentionality and permission to spend. One of the other things that I like to reframe, and I've been talking about a lot lately, I can't remember if I've told you this already. It's both new and been recommended in my head a couple months. Is that I'm done with the word saving. I know that a lot of people connect to it, and that's great. Take it and ignore the next thing that I say. But for those of you that don't connect to the word saving, and I always find it hard to save, let's just cut the crap. Saving doesn't exist. All money is meant to be spent. The real question is, when do you want to spend it? So some money you're going to want to spend now. Some money is for 3 months from now. Some money is for a car that you want to replace in 2 years. Some money is for a house in 10 years. Some money is for, down the road when you don't want to work anymore, when you're 70. Some money is for your kids to spend. But let's stop getting wrapped up with this idea that general pile of money is going to change our life in any way if we aren't engaged in the process of trying to use it on purpose. More money probably will just continue to amplify what you do right now. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot that you can do as far as sowing the seeds for permission in your finances and intentionality, finding ways that you can do that in a way that makes sense. And then even when you're stretching things out and creating more stability and having a bit more as far as buffers and things in savings accounts, whether they're savings or not, that money is still meant to be spent. It's just meant to be spent later as opposed to right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And that's where another one of these lessons that permeates so many different industries is like one of the biggest barriers for people like in general is the meaning of words. Mm. And so kind of like we were talking about where saving or budget still feels, if I was to just think about how a word feels, budget feels heavy. It feels like a drain. No shit, people don't want to do it, right? And that's where like even just understanding that, where it's like, okay, you seem to have a bad or maybe an unproductive relationship, or maybe an inaccurate relationship or understanding of maybe what this word could mean. So let's just use a different word, or maybe we'll reframe it and re-educate you about what it could mean. But I find that's really cool. I don't think we've talked about the idea of like saving isn't a thing. Let's just talk about spending. And like, is it like right now spending, or is it like future spending? I think that's an interesting reframe for sure. I hadn't thought of that.
Budget has a bit of a diet connotation. It has like
Yeah.
all the loadedness of diet, where some people are like, I can't eat anything that I want. And you're like, well, maybe there's a lot more nuance to diet. And the
Yeah. What kind
goal
of diet?
is health. And you're like, wait, but what is health? Well, I don't know. Who are you? What are we trying to do? What do you like? What is health to you? What is facility to you? What do you have to do and maybe even look like in order to feel healthy? And what's that conversation? And then, the right kind of complicated.
Totally.
That's got to be a title for something.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, your future book, we'll call it with that. Yeah, plant the seed now. So, so we've been chatting about 40 minutes or so about more conceptual things that I think are really, really, really interesting. However, kind of like what you were alluding to earlier, which was, okay, let's bring it, let's make this like tangible, pragmatic. Let's make this usable. So, let's say you and I haven't met before.
Yeah.
And I'm coming to you because I feel like I don't have a great skill set with money, and I'd like to get that ball rolling.
Yeah.
What might be the first 3 things that we would start with, and why?
So I talked before about trying to find the right questions. So the right kind of fundamental questions. And I really like using the word fundamental versus basics, because fundamentals, like in every kind of craft, they're the things you return to over and over again. Yeah. They're both where you start off when you're basic, and when you're a master, they're what you return to over and over again. You just get better at it, right?
Totally.
So the kind of fundamentals that I work through, and often when I work through somebody in a conventional engagement, these are the things that we're ticking off as we go through. So the first one is, what is your money for? But we've talked about that one to death, so I'll leave that one. The second one is, what do you need? So what do you need to me? And especially for those of you that have fluctuating income, if you try to Google how to make a budget, it'll be like, take your average income and divide it by 12. And then you've already closed the tab because it doesn't apply to you. So where we have to start is from a position of what we need. And when I say need, I don't mean what's the least amount of money that you can spend in order to stay vertical. That's not what I mean. I mean, what does it take to run a happy, healthy version of you? Or when you're just starting, what's all the aspects of spending in your life? And so practically, I like to think about that in 4 big piles. If you're any of Marie Kondo fans, this is like the same thing, like pulling out all the spending and like sorting it on your bed. That's the image that comes to my mind. So 4 big piles. So one is fixed expenses. What's the same every month in your life? So gathering those. Second one, what happens every month, but it's not the same? So in this category, we kind of have our food, grocery, kind of transportation world. Right. Third bucket, annual spending. This is what gets ignored all the time. For those of us like, this is such a killer, because you're like, oh, I'm good. My rent's paid, my utilities are paid. I got some money for food. We're good. We're coasting. And then annual payment on your credit card comes for $120. Or if you celebrate Christmas comes for $500. And it's just like bulldozes the semblance of your finances. So starting to identify some of those things is really helpful, because when you identify them, you can start to see them coming. And then the 4th big pile, for those of you that run your own business, is business costs. What are the things that you need to be spending in order to kind of run your business? So starting by putting those different expenses in your life into those 4 piles can be really helpful. And for those of you that are more friends with numbers, put numbers to them right away. For those of you that aren't, just write words, write the things that you spend in those 4 different piles, and start building up an idea of what you need on a monthly and yearly basis in order to support your life. Because we can't have conversations like, how do I pay my debt down faster? Or how do I, save up for a down payment, if we're not figuring out taking care of your own needs. Because these are the things that if you don't put money for them, they become accidental debt, or they become accidental stress. So getting that sense, it's a really good thing to work on first. What do you need? And then we look at the flip side of the coin. What do you have? Or how do you fill that need, is the way I like to express it. And so we just look at, what can you expect on the far as income side? How does that relate? What do you need to, especially as a self-employed person? Because let's say you need $50,000 a year to cover all those things. You can't just make $50,000 a year because of the silly government. For those of you that are in the employee, like our employees, your checks might have taxes taken off right away. But for some of you that are self-employed, that might be an issue. So really looking at me like, okay, if I need $50,000, how much do I have to make? And is that reasonable? So in the fitness industry, you can start to look at that yet again, not through numbers, but say, how many clients is that a month? How many clients am I signing up? So you're not seeing, sometimes income goals are a number on a page that don't mean anything to people. So instead of being like, you need to be making $5,000 a month, be like, okay, you need to be signing up on average 4 or 5 clients or 7 clients or 10 clients, depending on what your rate is, a month in order to kind of be in the ballpark, right? Because what we want to try to do when we're looking at these second and third fundamentals of what do I need and how do I fill that need, the reminder is always, it doesn't matter if you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, if you're spending more, it's out of balance. So the word always is, how can I bring my finances into balance with themselves? No matter what I'm making, no matter what I'm spending, it's the balance that matters. And so practicing that as a fundamental means that when you make more, you'll actually have more to spend on things that you're not currently spending on. Versus, if it's out of balance now, making more is probably just going to mean that it stays out of balance because more amplifies current behavior. Generally, at least that's been my experience. So what is my money for right now? What do I need? How do I fill that need? And then how do I stick to a plan? And building a bit of a structure. And that can sometimes be through a budget app or a spreadsheet, or I like to kind of build an account structure so things can kind of be automated and kept separately with bank accounts. But a lot of people like to start with that 4th step first. I'm going to sit down with the budget app and I'm going to make a full plan. And if I don't meet it by the first week, I've failed and I'm going to burn it all down and I'm never going to look at this again. You need good information in order to stick to a plan. My terrible analogy of this is always, I got married a couple of years ago, I think. Don't tell your sister. I know exactly what my anniversary is. And when I started wearing a wedding ring, it was a bit weird, right? Because I'm not used to wearing any kind of jewelry. And one of the things that I noticed right away was how much my fingers swell up when it gets hot or something like that. Not in a painful way, but all of a sudden I just noticed when I was pushing up against, sometimes I can take off my ring, sometimes I can't take off my ring. Yeah. It's not painful, but I notice the swells and the reductions in my finger. That's what a budget or a structure is. It's something that you put around your spending. It's not painful, but what it does is it tells you when you're pushing up against the bounds of what the plan was, so that you can say, I'm pushing up against the edge of what the plan was. Is that okay? Is that not okay? Do I want to take my ring off so I don't have to have it cut off by other people? This is where the metaphor breaks down, but that's not important. But it's important because I think a lot of people associate it with being like shackles that are tight and heavy and terrible. It's awareness. It's just something that you put around your spending so that you just know when you're in the bounds of normal and when you're stretching outside, so you can kind of like, there's an alarm bell that rings and be like, okay, I'm going to check on it now.
Yeah. This makes me think, I love cars. It makes me think of a rev limiter
where totally.
It's like, you can go forever, especially when it comes to like the integrity of an engine. When you're running at like 3,000 RPM, that's far more sustainable. But then once you start redlining, like 8,000, 9,000, and that little light starts to go where it's like, hey, careful. It's just, it's just information where it's like, I hear you, engine, but I need to be redlining right now.
This is such a great example actually for right now, because we're in a COVID global pandemic, and some of the listeners might actually feel like they have either been redlining or on the edge of redlining.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of right now. And so that might have to be what it is, but having really good information is really helpful for right now. And by good information, I mean, when you know what you need, you can look at what you have set aside for savings. And I know some of you immediately were like, I don't have savings set aside. This is dumb. Your assets can be more than just whether you have savings or not. If you did, great. That can be something you draw down. Maybe you're drawing down on credit. That's also fine. We're in a redlining situation for some people. That's just how it is. Maybe you're drawing down on or asking for family support. In any one of these scenarios, being able to have a really specific amount that you know is enough and drawing that specifically or asking for that specifically is a whole different feeling than kind of drawing down when you need, and it feels chaotic and you feel out of control, it's much, you're doing it on purpose. And so I love that analogy. It's being like, yes, this is happening. It has to happen right now. I can do this for another month until I need to slow it down. Otherwise I'm going to destroy my engine, So I'm okay for right now. This is when I'm going to change. You can start making some decisions around that. And so it's helpful no matter what state you're in. You don't have to wait until you're making a ton of money to practice these fundamentals. You can practice them if you're a student and you're making nothing. You can practice them if you're making a ton. You can practice them even as long as you have the emotional capacity for it. When you're in the middle of a pandemic, you don't have to, because there's a lot going on right now. And I understand if you don't have the emotional capacity to think about this stuff, but you don't have to put it off just because there's no income coming in. There are things you can work on.
Yeah. So can you maybe provide a little bit of a summary of, because you mentioned like those fundamentals.
Yeah.
The fundamentals being, and I think you mentioned three things. What are those four again? Just so we can go over those one more time.
What is my money for right now?
Yeah.
What do I need? How am I filling that need? And the like sub fundamental there is, and how does this balance? So like, what is the balance between those two things? And then how do I stick to the plan? So when you look at it and say like, I have enough to fill my need and I have these needs, how do I stick to that? And so that's when you kind of look at the structure side. So those, they're overarching, and there's lots of tools to fit in there, but they're good questions to ask yourself and start mulling over and start just gathering information, applying curiosity, building awareness in those aspects. Mm-hmm. And that'll help you start to develop better and better answers for those questions.
I love it. So I've got one more question for you before I ask my final one. So I guess I have two questions remaining.
That is true.
So I'm curious if what as someone who does work as a financial planner, if there was one thing, whether it be a belief or a concept, that you think is going to make the biggest difference in people's lives, whether it be a hard skill when it comes to money management or more of a philosophical type of reframe of how they see money, what would be, let's say, one thing, like if someone started the podcast right now or started watching this video as of right now and they were to only catch your next statement, what do you think that thing would be that you think would make the biggest difference in people's lives?
We can't look at money as a math problem to be solved. It's not a problem that you can solve by working really hard in one weekend. It's like health. It is a craft and a continuous process. And so by reframing it as that kind of work, it changes the way you have to face it. Stop putting pressure on yourself to get it all right tomorrow or figure it out this weekend or next week or even this year. It's a process that you're going to be engaged with for the rest of your life. So the problem then becomes, how do I make consistent time to work on this skill? Time is the big thing. Creating consistent time as opposed to big blocks of intense time that burn you out and make you not want to do it again. What that looks like in your life, you tell me. If that's, for some people, that's a 5-minute money meditation in the day. For some people, that's 10 minutes at the end of the week, half an hour at the end of the week. At the beginning, it can be as easy as opening up your bank accounts and looking at them, because I know some of you are really stressed and anxious to do that. For some of you, that might be sitting down and writing down at the end of every night just what you spent and what you made, just to kind of start building awareness. For some of you, it maybe there's real finance work to do. Having a bucket to put that in regularly so that it's not hanging over your head all the time. If you haven't done your taxes yet, instead of constantly feeling like every evening you should, start saying, okay, on Saturday mornings, I work on it. I set a timer for half an hour, an hour. When it's done, I'm done, because finances are not a thing I'm going to be finished with at any point in my life. They are a thing that I will continue to work on and be engaged in. And I think reframing that work, and especially however you are, and we're talking to a lot of fitness people, reframing that work in the context of work that you know how to do is really, really important. How have you set a routine for health? How can you add finance to that current routine? I think for me, the skills and the questions, but the applications and the tools, you're not going to get there if you haven't started to kind of create space in your life to get curious. And so that's the thing I think I would encourage people to do a little bit more in on the regular.
I love that. And, every single time you and I have a conversation, it money is but like one facet of our lives where there's these laws that kind of apply, somewhat or seemingly universal principles.
Mm.
And and it's relevant, like we mentioned before, in fitness or engineering or whatever. Like some of these concepts permeate many different industries. And there's one that I'd like to share just because it's been so useful in my life. And it's this idea of moving from I need to, or I should, or I have to do something to I get to. Quite literally, the only reason why you have to do taxes is because you have money. That's a good problem to have, right? Like, think about it. Would you rather have to do taxes and have money, or have literally zero income?
Yeah.
Are you sure you want the no tax option? Right? Like think about it. Like, the only reason why you have to do this or get to do this work is because you're profitable, is because you are being paid to contribute to society. And I'm not surprised that you went with more of a reframe, because you and I are so alike. And when we look at like money as just being kind of like a reflection of human behavior and values, then we need to look at the larger kind of conceptual and like how our perception influences our behavior. So I'm not surprised you went there, and I love that. And so in closing, for if people want to learn more about you, your work, I know you've got some free resources online, or if people are looking to work with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, so you can find me at www.ragstoreasonable.com. That's really the best place to find it. There's a bunch of free resources as far as workbooks and worksheets, and as well as a whole bunch of writing that's been on there over the years. I run a couple of different ways that you can kind of, my focus is on one-to-one help. So I run a monthly free office hours, usually on the third Monday of the month, but you can sign up for that on the site. They're half-an-hour Zoom chats. They're free. They're in no way they're completely no strings attached. There's not a sales pitch at any point. It really is just, if I can help in any way, that's what that time is there for. And then I also run one-on-one financial coaching and planning. And so both in terms of getting cash flow and some of the things we've talked about today worked out, and more kind of complicated, intricate, long-term type things, I help with both of those sides of things. And the first call is always free. It's a conversation between what you're looking for and what I can offer. And so if you think it might be helpful, reach out. My big thing, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way in the service industry, is that I connect you to the person that would be the best fit. And so it's, I think I'm a good starting place, whether you end up with me or whether I can connect you to some other great places. If you're looking for some one-on-one financial support, please feel free to send me an email. There's a tab on my site, but also you can just write me at chris@ragstoreasonable.com is my email address. So feel free to reach out.
Sweet. I love that. And, speaking from personal experience, obviously I'm biased because we're family now, #marriage. Financial planning is one of those things that in high school, and even when I worked for Good Life for over a decade, that I had no training in, and that my lack of skills, it's just like, it really just boiled down to skill set. My lack of skill set was what was costing me money. And so I found that our time together has been an investment in developing the skill set that then has led to greater financial prosperity. So, and I use the word investment strategically because it's led to me being more profitable. It hasn't been an expense, like if we were to play a game and it was like, if you were to pay me $2 and I was to give you $4, would you take that bet? And like, yeah, like every single time you would do that. I don't know if that made any sense, but you get what I'm saying.
I'll take that bet.
Yeah, there you go. And like, I find that, at least in my life, financial coaching has been one of those things where it's a guaranteed return on investment. Even if it's just because you're spending the time actively thinking about it. And it's a skill that you're going to need to have till the day you die. So I'm so grateful for the work that you do. Not only you as a human being, but like the active contribution that you have in your community and mine to help with variable income, because it can be really stressful.
Yeah.
It can be really difficult and daunting, and you have such a really beautiful and easy way, to be very honest, I find, and some very refreshing reframes on money. So for those that are watching this, honestly, check it out. Take advantage of his office hours. Like he mentioned, it's free. And I can guarantee that you're going to get your money's worth, because there's quite literally no fee. But I can guarantee that you're gonna get a lot from your time with Chris, as I have. So in closing, Chris, is there anything that you want to add?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Always to talk with you. And I get to do lots and lots, but still not enough.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hopefully you having moved somewhat closer will solve that problem. So thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate you carving out the time for this. And like I mentioned, everyone, reach out. There's literally zero risk. It's all gain. Check them out at www.ragstoreasonable.com. Okay.
Nailed it.
Awesome. Have a great day, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.